when anything happens. All right. So we're live. Welcome, Chris. Really good to see you, and good to chat to you about the Diemersfontein wines. As I mentioned in previous conversations, we're having a conversation with some people here in the US who are very interested in South African wines and are very interested about Diemersfontein specifically, and who are collectors and are looking and excited to get their hands on some of your beautiful products and your beautiful wines. But I thought what we would do today is really just talk through the farm, the region, the wines, and of course any sort of interesting information you can share with us around Diemersfontein and what you guys are doing. But before we kick off, let's get a little introduction about who you are, Chris. If you wouldn't mind giving us a little background to your to who you are and the context and what you do with Diemersfontein. Over to you.
Thank you, Warren. So yes, I'm Chris O'Shea. I have a little bit of Irish blood in me and South African. I've lived and traveled all around the world, and my role at Diemersfontein really is the sales locally, which is 80% of our business, and then trying to build our export business, of which the States is a key part. So having a conversation with you is really important for us strategically to get a presence in the USA, which we really don't have at the moment. And I also look after the marketing of the brand, and then with the team in what we call the destination management, which I'll talk about in a couple of minutes when we talk about the estate. So that's a bit about me. Thanks, Warren.
Excellent, thanks. And yes, I mean, just to build off what you were saying around the wines not really being established here in the US, I think part of the reason for us having this conversation is that we have people here that are really interested in getting their hands on your wines, and this is a journey to be able to do that for you to bring your wines over, and for our wonderful people over here to enjoy them. Let's kick off into talking a little bit about the region. You guys are based in Wellington, which is north of a lot of the other wine regions that we often associate the Western Cape to be around. But it would be good for us to just get a sense of the geography, the climate in that region, the terroir, and just overall what's it like there in the Wellington region, and we can sort of dive into a little bit of that insight. Thank you.
So yes, Warren. So we sit. If you look at a map of Cape Town and you look at where Paarl is, which is sort of from the city center, almost northwest. We're about a 45-minute drive, so about 70-80 kilometers from the center of Cape Town. You can go to Paarl, which many people know, but Wellington is beyond that. So we sit between Wellington, and then through Wellington you would get to what is essentially the Swartland, which is flatter region. But around Wellington it's quite mountainous, as it is in Paarl. The picture I'm showing you and a few more, you'll see quite high mountain ranges. So we do sit very close behind the estate, some of the highest mountain ranges, which then go further into more series of them. You get snow in the winter, so a little bit cool in the winter, where we get all our rains like the rest of the Cape. And then in summer it gets really, really hot. Wellington has a couple names. One of them is called Harlequin, and that's because we don't get as much wind as you do in some of the other areas in the Cape Winelands, and so it can easily be 45, 46 degrees, no wind, which then it bakes, and I'll come back to why that's sometimes a good and a bad thing. So we've got quite steep mountains behind us, and then rolling hills in between the wine estate, right up the way to the end where it gets very mountainous. So in terms of soils, it's different soils, granite, shale. It's a typical what you find in the Western Cape. So it's nothing specific and different to Wellington. But what is important for the Wellington area, where historically a lot of fruit was grown, it still is regarded as one of the fruit growing regions, although it's expanded. There's actually a brand name called Wellington Fruits. But there was a tannery that's now shut down, and then it's also known for the whiskey distillery, where Three Ships and Baines, and the Baines name comes from the Baines Pass, which sits behind Wellington, the town, one of the most iconic passes in the Cape, and that is quite known, therefore, for adventure. So Wellington is an area outside of wine, where it's not the biggest and best known wine region, is quite an adventure area. But one small fact that most people don't know, about a third of all the what we call stockies, which are the little vines that we use to grow when you're planting a vine, actually come from the Wellington area. So Wellington has the reputation of being the nursery for vines in South Africa, and that's an important fact to know. Where we are, we'll see some pictures. We're not close up to the mountain, so we don't have vines on the mountain. It's more rolling hills. And if I talk a little bit about Diemersfontein, it is a wine and country estate. So from that perspective, it's not just wine we have. It's 183 hectare. You'll see a picture there of some of the state. We have water on the dam, but it lies in what is called the Harlequin Mountains, which is quite a big series of mountain ranges, and then a view of the Tuiskloof, which is quite a important pass going under the mountain through to Worcester and Robertson, and as I said, Kloof. So on the 183 hectares, there are various things which I'll come to. A little bit of history. This was a fruit farm back in the days. The very early history of it, from the late 1700s, which is where the name comes from. It was owned by a family called Diem. The Diem family owned a number of wine farms, and therefore we do get confused and associated with Diemersdal. Ironically, that was also owned by the Diem. So you'll find a number of Diem names within wines. And then the Fontaine, obviously in English, meaning fountain, and there is a fountain on the estate, so that's hence the name, Diemersfontein. But the modern history of it, so going back from the 1700s, when it was essentially just a farm with a little bit of fruit and grew to be more of that, when it was bought 3 generations ago from the Sonnenburgs, David, who's currently the generation that's living, his grandfather bought it in the early 40s, and it was really a home for retreat and a fruit farm. And the first vines were planted, 40 years ago, and the wine history is fairly new for Diemersfontein, so really only around the 2000. And as a result, we don't have a lot of new stuff on the farm. It's fairly old buildings. It's fairly what we call welcoming family country charm, being we like to see ourselves as a family, people who come can rest and relax, and the country charm, because we literally are out of Cape Town. And so that's a little bit of the story. If you want me to carry on a little bit more, I'll talk a little bit more about the estate and where we are today, and a little bit about the vineyards. So we don't have everything planted with vines of the 183 hectares. There's a combination of a few dams, of which there's a view of one at the moment. We have 3 dams. Water is vitally important in the Cape, especially in the summer. Long wet winters, dry hot summers. So you need to have a good water for irrigation. No rain almost in the summertime, and especially when you're in Wellington, when it gets so hot, you have to keep things cool, and so therefore having own water source is important. We have roughly 46 hectares planted. Wellington is not known for certain varietals, so when we talk about what we offer and what we plant, but the most famous is Pinotage. So if you were to talk of capitals of Pinotage, Wellington would be one of them. We have a lot of Pinotage producers, and quite famous and well known, and therefore even with the co-op in the town, that is an important part. But we also have Cabernet, we have Chenin, we have Viognier, we have some Cab Franc, Petit Verdot, Mauvais, and some Shiraz. And Shiraz and Pinotage are the two on the red side, and Chenin on the white. We don't really, and Wellington is not really good for Sauvignon Blanc. Right. So that's a little bit about what we have planted. If I continue, and you just give me the time out,
sure.
To say, within Diemersfontein, if we
just quickly before we move on to the estate. So I know we talked about the terroir, the climate. Is there a way for you just to give a little bit of a distinction of the differences between the different regions and why Wellington is different? I know you talked about the heat, or Hellas, what did you call it, Hellington? But if we compare to what's happening in the Swartland, what's happening down in Stellenbosch, what's happening across in Elgin, versus what you guys have got from a climate and a terroir perspective. So I understand what you described with regards to the water and the elevation and the valleys and all that, but is there a distinct difference between those other regions and what you guys have got?
Well, yes and no. I mean, there's lots of common denominators. Obviously, the Cape wine region is huge.
Yeah.
You know, when you explain to people that you go from Cape Town 1,100 kilometers north to get to the Orange River, and you're still within the Cape wine region. The Orange River, if you start there, is higher yields, flatter land. The grape varietals that are grown there are slightly different, including table grapes. So that's where normally the cheapest wines come from, as well as you know, as more the sort of generic blends, varietals. You know, the Cinsos and things like that. When you come down to where we are, I mean, Paarl and Wellington are one and the same almost, in terms of landscape types of wines. And you know, Paarl is where KWV is and where Niederberg is. So we're neighbors with two of the better known wineries or wine names. When you get to Stellenbosch, you start to get a little bit more of the sea breezes, the cool sea breezes coming off the False Bay. So depending on what side of Stellenbosch you are, you start to get more pronounced white wine when you start heading towards Somerset West, which is literally on the False Bay. Like if you're in Constantia, you get a lot of cool sea breezes, which is where Sauvignon Blancs and certainly some of the let's call it the cooler climate reds like Merlots would do better. So you know, the sea breezes and sometimes they're more than just a breeze, play a big role, as does elevation. So when you start to go to Elgin, which is much higher up in the mountains, cooler climate wines, then you will get you know, a lot of things like Pinot Noirs and the cooler climate. But you know, in South Africa, for example, you can get 6 different types of Sauvignon Blanc, depending on where you are. Because when you get to Darling on the west coast, so that was called more south, and then you go through to the eastern part of the region. Darling also has a lot of cool Atlantic sea breezes. So their Sauvignon Blancs will be very different from what is grown, say, in Robertson. So Robertson, when you look behind the mountain ranges where we are, you go over a series of mountain ranges and through a pass to Toyscloof, and you get to Worcester and Robertson. There you start to get higher yields. It gets hot, but they somehow also get cooler breezes, not as much wind in terms of the coastal areas. And there things like Chardonnay grow well. Sauvignon Blanc grows well. So you've got lots of big co-ops in that area. Stellenbosch, not so many co-ops. So Stellenbosch, for example, like Wellington, like Paarl, more known for their reds than whites, because it's slightly hotter. When you get into Franschhoek, it's like being in the Swiss Alps, smaller estates, you know, sort of very different styles of wines. But it's not easy to say, well, Pinotage only grows in one area. You know, there are a number of regions and wine routes, and as a result of which you would find common denominators amongst most of them. As it is, because experimenting because of the droughts and the water with different types of varietals and the whole change of climate to make sure that, you know, things are planted in the right areas, the right slopes, because that's important. I mean, you know, a bit like Spain, I guess, and a few other places, a lot of mountain ranges and, you know, planting in the right areas. And so where we are, you know, we have to make sure on our estate, we've got Pinotage planted in the right area with morning sun, afternoon sun. You know, if there's going to be any breezes, to make sure that the varietals are on the right side of the slope, because essentially Diemersfontein vineyard is kind of on a slope, so a gentle slope looking down, and then at the top we sort of got a ridge, but it's not very high. So from a, you know, we're not anywhere near the mountainside, so we don't have anything growing at very high altitudes in that respect.
So just to summarize a little bit. So basically, what we're saying is that because Diemersfontein and the Wellington region specifically is not coastal, so you don't get those cooler sea breezes coming through. You have the high heat, which is good for reds, and you don't have that elevation so much, which would be more of a you know, I guess it's more Sauvignon Blanc sort of kind of check.
Yeah, Sauvignon Blancs and Chardonnay. Where it does kick in with whites is Chenin. And so the Swartland to compare, where the Swartland's known for a lot of the bush vines, that extends through to Wellington and what we call Achterpaal, where, you know, as you start to going towards Durbanville, you'll find quite a lot. So we have quite a bit of bush vine on our estate, and oldest vines on the estate where one of our Chenins comes from is there. So where it flips into white is generally in that bush vine area. But yeah, if you look at our mix of varietals, they're predominantly white. Where the white variety, and it's a small planting, is Viognier, which we do use, but it's a very small amount.
Okay.
And our Merlot we're about to take out, because Merlot from Wellington, and that's my comment about cooler climate reds, where Merlot doesn't like that heavy, that very high heat, and consistently so. But Pinotage and Shiraz does.
Okay, amazing. Let's move on to talk about the next slide, which is really, let's talk about the estate, what you guys have got there from a history perspective, and obviously the owners and the characters on the estate, and then we can talk. Then we move on to talk about the wonderful wines that the estate produces as well. So
yeah, so just a short history. I mean, I mentioned the late 1700s. The manor house is the 1800s. It was burnt down and rebuilt, and there's a picture of it on the screen. It's nothing fancy, but it's a traditional Cape Dutch style, big patios, and everything that's Cape Dutch style. David Sonnenburg and his wife Sue lived in the UK for 20 years. When they came back to South Africa, they decided not just to establish the wine side, which was essentially a lot of new plantings. They also decided to create a little bit more of a destination, so converting the fruit environment into more wine side. The current wine cellars was a tractor shed. The conference center, which we do have, was the old fruit packing. But one of the things they created was a garden, and the reason is David and Sue's family have a lot of arts background and cultural background. His mother established a very famous garden in Cape Town where a lot of musicals were held, in a very old suburb in Cape Town. So he replicated that, and there's a picture, and that historically was used for weddings. We also have accommodation, so around these gardens there are some rooms for rental, which we have, and we welcome people. There's a little bit more history which ties into one of our wines. During that period, because we sit close to the mountains, there were a lot of Italian prisoners of war, not just Diemersfontein, but on a few farms. They helped to build Bainscliff Pass, which is a very serious piece of engineering in the Cape, and so they were housed on Diemersfontein. So that, and there's a story linked to our Clockmaker when we talk about it just now. So essentially, and they also used to sing on the farm, opera, and there's a connection between David and Sue, because Sue used to sing opera in London. She came back and they created a Excellence Out of Africa Trust, where they develop young talent, which has been the theme of them for the last 20 odd years, is giving back to the community. Having said that, they've developed the talent. Some of them have moved on to live overseas. They've involved in the arts in a very many ways. They're a member of a very big part of the Cape musical scene. Directors of what is called the Baxter Theatre in Cape Town, if anyone knows that. So their background is very much in the arts, and it stems from their parents, especially David's. And as I said, Sue used to sing, and so there are a lot of musical talent they developed. Okay, the other side of it is they've tried to give back to the employees. That was one thing David wanted to do when he met Nelson Mandela in London. Nelson Mandela said, "You need to come back to South Africa." And in coming back, they don't have any children. In creating the children, they've done a couple things, and one of them is to create an empowerment business, and that's where Tokozani comes in, which I'll mention. And that covers, at the moment, 48 of our workers, from the vineyards through to our conferencing hospitality. And so, yeah, I'll come back to talk about Clockmaker on the wine side.
Good question, if you don't mind, because I was what you mentioned there about the music in the gardens, and you mentioned, I think it was the mother who started something in Cape Town. You're not referencing Kirstenbosch, are you?
No, it's called Maynardville in Wynberg. So it was gardens, which unfortunately is not in the state it used to be. And there you can have open air concerts. So the idea was a gardens with concert. No, so it's not Kirstenbosch. It's the Maynardville in Wynberg. Not far from Kirstenbosch, but not as big and grandiose as Kirstenbosch is.
It's lovely to hear that sort of flowing through of the arts and the music and the give back to the community, sort of flowing through everything that you guys are doing, which really gives it a nice flavor.
And when I come to talk about some of the wines, you'll see in one of the, or two of the names mentions of that. If I just carry on a little bit, so David, obviously, in order to create a bit of a lifestyle, a number of years ago, he developed the, let's call it the freehold home system. Currently, there's 178 homes on the estate, from a village townhouse complex to a little bit more elaborate homes, of which there's a picture on the screen of one surrounded by vineyards. Some of them have fantastic views of those mountains that I'm showing you in the picture at the back. And they're sprawled around the estate in between vineyards, some of them a little bit more closer to one another. He's just launched his, I've been told not to call it retirement, lifestyle around the Manor Gardens. And the idea is that those 18 homes will have exclusive use of the Manor Gardens going forward. So those have been launched, and the building is about to start. They're cutting down a lot of the trees. Like many farms in the Cape, and there's been over the many years now, a push to get aliens out of the Western Cape because they are just so water hungry. And one of them is the blue gum tree, which was it came from Australia, and it was an invasive plant species. Many farms are cutting them down. We've had many on the estate, and they're busy cutting them down in order to conserve more water because they're very water hungry. They're not an indigenous plant. And so there's, on the farm, we tried to look at more indigenous plantation. So hence the blue gums are being taken down, more of the pine trees, and then a lot of the fynbos, or what we call renosterveld. So renosterveld is a very, translation is rhinoceros field, which is plants that don't need a lot of water. They're kind of heat resistant, almost to the point where they can protect you from fire. They need to burn every now and again. And they're part of the fynbos, and we've got a few of that on the farm as well. The biggest legacy, if I just move on from the homes and that, which is not really the legacy, that was more to create a lifestyle concept. So yes, when people come visit us, they can drive around and walk around and see all of what I've said. There's no segregation; it's all integrated. What I guess the biggest legacy is the next point around the school. So a very big part of not only the arts was the education, and at the bottom of the estate, which used to be called part of it was the workers' houses. And without going into all the history, David offered to develop those houses for the workers, and they all said, no, we want to live in the town. So he didn't know what to do with it. So he developed with Sue and himself the school. So it's called Wellington Prep and College. Initially started as a preparatory junior school, and now it's also got a high school and a preschool. And the facilities, I don't have a lot of pictures to show you, but we can do that separately. It's got football fields, and when I say football fields, soccer in the USA. It's got swimming pools. It's got basketball courts. It's about 320 kids, of which David and Sue's Trust, which is a separate to the wine, sponsors about 40 children, predominantly underprivileged. But the people that come to the school come from all backgrounds, including some children whose families live on the estate. And it's what we call IEB, so International Education Board. So it is a private school and allows the kids to go and study in the States or Europe. And that, I guess, is one of the top priorities of the legacy that David and Sue, and they sit on the board, and it's run successfully by an independent governing body as well. Okay. And yeah, it's a real school, and many South African farms would have a farm school. This is not a farm school. It is a proper school. The headmaster comes from a really well-known Cape Town school, and so on and so forth. And then if I move on to the next one, within what I mentioned earlier on about establishing Thokozani, that's essentially a staff holdings and the opportunity to create a Black empowerment partnership. And what Thokozani is essentially a name which has mentioning it from one of the tribal languages, Zulu celebration. It was launched about 22 years ago, initiated by David and a lady called Denise Stubbs, who's sitting third from the left on the bottom of this picture. And the idea was a more sustainable economic empowerment, let's call it project and initiative, that is extended now into 3 areas: hospitality, it's a brand itself, and then in the sense of creating the opportunity also to have investment in the broader Diemersfontein business, okay, which allows them to get shares at the end of the financial year through sales of Diemersfontein as well, okay. And it is 100% black owned.
There's a, sorry to interrupt, Chris, but the brand goes into the actual wines as well. There's a wine brand that you guys have produced.
Yes, so absolutely, absolutely. And I'll show you a picture of two of the wines. They don't have a big range, but they also get the benefit of the Diemersfontein sales. So portion of what we sell through Diemersfontein, they also get a share, but they have their own brands. And just this last month, we've launched another wine for them, which is a Chenin, which I don't have a picture because it's so recent. So yes, that's a little bit about it, but it's not a freebie. It's not that they come in and because that's been a big problem. And we've tried to make it that it's not about a handout. It's a real partnership. So people have to qualify to be part of the Tukhazani. Just before I show the wines and we talk about wines, just to complete, we do have all the facilities for hospitality. So if anyone who's watching this wants to come out, we have 3- and 4-star rooms. The 3-star are the garden cottages around the manor gardens, and then the 4-star, which are Tukhazani houses. We do have a restaurant. We obviously have a tasting room. One thing that Wellington is known for, because of the heat, it's quite a big area for olive trees and for olive oil, and that's becoming a big part of the Western Cape. It never used to be like this. So we do have a number of olive trees on the farm. We're not an olive tree estate. We've just planted another 100 olives now because we're seeing the demand grow. So we do have our own olive oil under Diemersfontein, which obviously comes from the estate. And we don't really go outside of that. Everything we make, we sell. But it's another little offering.
Just a quick ball on that. I'm sorry, I keep interrupting, but just firstly, thank you for the invitation for folks that are coming over to come and enjoy the estate. This is something that we will be looking to start packaging up on the club side. So we've got a lot of those that'll be seeing this video of members of a club that we run called the Painted Dog, which is yes, wine, people that really appreciate wine, but also want to experience the region. So I may just take you up on that invitation in the not too distant future. Hey, we've got some folks coming over and they need a little bit of white glove treatment and showing around the place.
Absolutely. You know, the one thing I'd say, Warren, is we're not 5-star in terms of facilities, but we have 5-star people and service. So when people come here, we want them to relax, walk around, feel free to explore. I mean, obviously they can go outside of the estate and do whatever they want to. So yeah, just to complete the hospitality side, we do conferencing. We have, as I said, 4-star and 3-star. So we can accommodate in conferencing up to about 50 people, including the cottage, which I'm sitting in at the moment, which is 3 bedrooms. So we can squeeze in up to that amount at a push. We're more comfortable around the 35. But if it's a group of 10, 15, not a problem. And of course, less it's fine. And so there's some pictures there of Tukhazani cottages, a conferencing room, where we can, under different conditions, go even further in terms of people. So it's not a hotel conferencing, but we can, and we do get a lot of, ironically, schools from the States. We get a lot of colleges coming out. We've got a lot of academic universities coming, whether from South Africa, particularly from the Cape, the 2 big universities in the Cape. And so we host them, and some of them have come back regularly at a time. And some of them that come on educational trips, and they spend a day with us, and some of them that stay over. So we're quite strong on that side. So that link back into the education, academic, David's tried to nurture that over time. And as I said, you have free access to the farm. There's no restrictions. You walk around, and you often see dogs and everybody on the estate. It's a real family setup. Okay.
All right, on to the wines. So I know you've got quite a big. So just as a preamble, I know you've got a really extensive range coming out of Diemersfontein, and we're not going to have time to go through them all, unfortunately, today. But I think, Chris, we spoke about sort of highlighting a couple of the wines that you guys are producing, and just giving us a little bit of a taste of the different variations. I think you've already given us the preamble about the regions and what really grows well in that region, what is produced well. But let's talk about some of the brands and the labels that you guys are producing.
Yes. Okay. So before I get to the individual wines, just 2 or 3 more facts. I mean, our head winemaker and cellar master is Francois Ruder. If we do a tasting in the virtual tasting in the future, he'd come on board. He's been with us for 20 years, so pretty much part of the furniture. And I mentioned about the tractor shed. It's a small cellar. It's only 350 tons. So if you look at the numbers between the size of cellar and our volume, and actually this year, financial year, it's gone up to 130,000 cases, you'll say, hang on, those numbers don't work. So yes, we do buy in quite a bit of wine. One of our biggest customers, retail customers, those of you who know South Africa, or even if you're in the UK, you know Marks and Spencer. We have Woolworths in South Africa. That's a very big customer of ours. We do a number of wines through them. So not all our wines are grown on the estate and that we sell. We do buy in. Our biggest partner is Wellington Wines, which was originally the biggest co-op in the region, and now it's converted to a more commercial business. So we're a shareholder in that. We partner with them, and we do make wines through them and store wines. A little fun fact: David's grandfather was the founder of Woolworths, but then there was a generation break at David's father, Richard, and he never continued. And then another Jewish family took over to build Woolworths, and so they are our biggest customer. But then just to give some intro to 2 or 3 things, and then I'll start to talk about the wines rather than flick through all the slides, because as Warren says, we have an extensive range of wines, which I'm flicking through, but I will stop there and just go back to one. When David came back to South Africa, he had a young man and a winemaker who said to him, David, you need to put Pinotage in this area. And David knew very little about wines. And actually, one of the ranges at the top end is called Carpe Diem, seized the day, because David was 54 when he came back to South Africa to start essentially Diemersfontein wines, and what I told you earlier on about the transformation. And it was a push of 2 things. Nelson Mandela saying, come back, and this young winemaker and young man who said, listen, you come, because they had a viticulturist come out to Diemersfontein, and not just unique to Diemersfontein, the surrounding areas. And in Afrikaans, they say puddingland, which means pudding land. And the soils were perfect for growing Pinotage. And so what put Diemersfontein on the map, and has kind of gone with the DNA of Diemersfontein for the last 23 or so years, has been the original coffee chocolate Pinotage, which I'll now show you a little bit more and talk a little bit more about it. On the screen as a tasting note, there's no expectation of talking about, and it is our biggest wine selling at the moment, although we do sell a lot of other wines through Woolworths that's exclusive to them. But this is our biggest volume line. It started off, as you might have seen on the previous slide, in just after 2001, and its first year it won what was an iconic award called the Paul Sauer Trophy. Why? Because there had never been anything done like this. Yes, there were Pinotages, but no one had ever done a coffee chocolate Pinotage. And over the years, the profile's changed. It is a love-or-hate wine. Why? Because people who don't like coffee, and it's slightly muted on the chocolate side, but it's predominantly coffee, will say I love it or don't. But those who love it have loved it for 20 odd years and continue to love it. So it stays as a key part of our pillar, and we are proudly Pinotage producers. Therefore, we have a number of Pinotages, but that's what's made us famous. And historically, all of it came off the farm, but the volumes got too big, so we partner up with Wellington Wines. If you look at Wine of Origin, this wine is all Wellington. We do buy everything from Wellington. And in terms of what you can eat with it, it's the traditional meat dishes from lamb, casseroles. We can suggest curries, but especially the gentle curries, not the heavy, rich Indian curries.
Yes.
But it's also good with chocolates and chocolate desserts, and as we call it, a good old braai. Because it is a slightly more serious wine, structured wine. It's not a easy lifestyle. We have another wine I'm going to show you just now on that basis. So a little bit more about it. We sell it in many countries. We've been big in the UK. We've been big in in Sweden with it. We've been big in Russia. It is our #1 wine in South Africa, very big with the retailers. And, you know, if any wine is listed from us, it's this one. And if you ask me which is the wine we would really want to see start going in the States, this would be on the list of the top 3. And I wouldn't suggest that we want to build, you know, 20 of our wines, because we have literally about 24 different wines in our portfolio. If we pick the top 3 or 4, this would be one of them. I don't know if there's anything else you want me to mention.
Well, it sounds like it's a very versatile wine, right? In the sense that you're saying you could have it with a braai, or as Americans would call them, barbecues over here.
Yes.
Weirdly enough, I don't know if you know, Chris, but lamb is not a thing in the United States, or not that people don't eat a lot of lamb, but it would go really well with a nice barbecue. We do braais as well, which is slightly different to a barbecue, but this would go really well with that. And interesting, when you picked up what you said, how this could actually pair quite well with a dessert dish. I guess is that coffee chocolate element coming through, which is quite interesting. So quite a diverse range of pairings, which is interesting. But
with a very distinctive profile. So, you know, as I said, you have people who say, no, I don't like coffee chocolate, then this is not a wine for them. Just a little bit on the winemaking. Obviously, the volumes we're doing, we use staves, and actually in our tasting room, we've got a wall of the staves. So these are essentially, you know, call it burnt, and they're burnt specifically according to our needs, and then we use the staves to age, so that we get that proper profile of the wine. Okay, so yeah, it goes through the normal processes, but this is not a wine that we put a lot into barrels. I mean, staves obviously, and they're not small staves. I mean, they're sort of 2 meters long by about 20 centimeters wide. They're almost planks, you know, that go into tanks, and then through that goes through 6 months of fermentation. Okay. But yeah, that's our most iconic wine. That's what people know us for worldwide. Even people who have traveled the world, have been here, you know, wherever they go, they ask for the coffee chocolate. There've been people who've copied us. Some have come and some have gone. Some are cheaper. In fact, a lot are cheaper. We've kept this premium. We rather built around this brand, other pinotages, and we've just launched a new one in the last month as well, which I can mention just briefly. Okay, so if I continue on the theme of pinotage for a second, if it's okay with you, can I move on?
Yeah, it's good.
You know, obviously everyone understands that, you know, we need to be more modern and sophisticated in terms of the international demand, and everyone talks now about making more fruit-driven wines. So the Prodigy, which integrates a little bit of the music theme, as you can see by the packaging. I mean, we use the DF everywhere we go, so you'll see the DF, and that comes from an old Sanskrit writing. So that type of writing which David has used on the logo, and I say the logo, the DF, comes from an old Sanskrit use, and that's an old ancient language in the area.
Actually going to be my sort of end of conversation question, is give us the story behind the logo, but you've given it away already. It's great, but I hadn't picked up that's the Sanskrit of DF. It's great now that I know the story.
Yeah, so it is a DF. You know, people can't always read it, but that's on most of our wines. But yeah, the Prodigy is I say an easier drinking wine. It doesn't go through as complex fermentation process. It's also Western Cape. So when we say Western Cape, the moment you go out of a region, if you're not coastal and you're starting to get wines like we do from other regions that are not coastal, you have to classify it as Western Cape. So a lot of wines are becoming more Western Cape, especially at the commercial end. In this case, this is it. We sell quite a bit of it in the South African retail. And it's just an easier drinking wine, of completely different flavor profile. And once again, Pinotage is compared to the Cabs and the Shirazes and the Merlots, a much heavier wine and very good with red meat. So yes, when you say it's not lamb, in this case, yes, a braai. You know, anything that's red meat will work, and anything that's dark red meat is best. And once again, Pinotage is good with lambs as well. It's more an easy eating meat than it is a heavy steak or something like that. But Pinotage goes well with that. So that's the Prodigy for you. We do age it a bit, but it's not, the idea of it is not to sell it as it's a screw cap, whereas the original coffee chocolate is in cork, different bottle, but you can see the theme of music coming through and the name. I think if you don't mind, I'm going to just jump and finish the reds first, and I'll jump back to a couple of the whites. I won't be able to cover everything in this review, as you said early on. So if there's a wine I need to cover off, we can do that. Just in terms of the top end of our range, we have two wines. I've decided to use the Malbec here. Because we do have a Pinotage, and when we look at our range of Pinotage under Diemersfontein, we have 4 of them, and in this same level called Carpe Diem, reflecting on what I said about David coming back. We have a Malbec and a Pinotage. We used to have others under it, but a Chenin, which we've changed, and I'll mention that in a moment. So Malbec is not a big varietal in South Africa, not planted everywhere. It does suit the Wellington climate. We make for Woolworths a co-branded Malbec, and we have our own, in this case, under Carpe Diem. Very similar packaging. And yeah, it's not the biggest volume, but it does win awards. It is interesting and different wine. Not many farms make a Malbec, and certainly premium Malbec. And so therefore, David had decided to do something as a different offering, and that suits the region, and this is one of them. So it goes through, a little bit more serious oaking and racking and all the rest, because to suit the profile of the wine, these wines we've got vintages going back to 2015, whereas on the Pinotage we got going back to 2012. So you'll see that we talk about aging, 10 years plus. From that perspective, this is 100% Malbec. We say Western Cape because whilst we can survive on our own demand with the Woolworths, we have to go a little bit outside, and we get from other regions as well for this. So it's a combination of winemaking, but it's the same essentially wine we make for them as we use for us, and that's kind of where we've been. So Malbec is I'd say a unique offering, not to Western Cape or to the Cape Winelands, but in Wellington, I think of the top 5 or 6 Malbecs, I think 2 or 3 of them come from Wellington. So Wellington, a bit like 1 or 2 other specific reasons, you won't find Malbec grown in many areas. A little bit in Elgin, a little bit in Hermanus Way, which has also got some cooler climate and sea breezes and mountains. And there's a place called Himmel and Aarde, heaven and earth. So yeah, those are the areas that would grow it. So that's something that is a little bit of a stamp for us. We don't sell a lot of volume, but it sits at the top end of our range. Okay, I'm going to take your lead off the next one in terms of wine to talk about.
I think we could probably do. We've already talked about maybe do the Harlequin, which is obviously I'm just personally interested about the packaging of it, and the wine itself being slightly different to what you've got, and then. Maybe we touch on, I don't know if you want to touch on the Tokozani and the Ovation towards the end, and just to give you a sense of the range, and then we can wrap.
Yeah, so this wine Harlequin is a little bit of an oddity in our range. I'll have to be honest. It doesn't fit into the packaging profile that I've been showing you, and I'll complete when I show you 1 or 2 more wines. But it is a blend. It's got a bit of the Maca Shiraz. We tend to have quite a bit of Maca in our range, and that sits in a number of our wines, including this one. And so, yeah, in terms of the packaging, it comes from a painting that David and Sue had, which was quite a famous painting. And what happens is that the original artist and his gallery gets a percentage commission based out of sales for this wine, which we pay to them, and it goes to an art development fund that they have to, once again, supporting, as you picked up on the theme, a lot of art development and art and cultural developments that Sue and David. So we don't sell a lot of this wine. It is a bit of an oddity, but it gives us another story to tell. Shiraz Pinotage, once again, 2 of the great varietals that Wellington does well. It's quite a structured wine for its price point. quite a serious wine, in fact, for where we sit on the price point. And so once again, people who drink this wine, if they like a more structured wine than just a cheap, not so cheap, a fruity wine, then they'll like the Harlequin. The balance of the wine does change in terms of, I think this 22 is 65-35, so predominantly Shiraz. So an interesting different wine, but you'll see throughout this packaging very different references to Diemersfontein. So hence, from a ranging perspective, this is the wine we're busy considering. What do we do with it? Where do we go with it? And so on and so forth. Okay, so
it's an interesting blend, the 65 Shiraz, 35 Pinot. Part of the reason why I wanted us to talk about a little bit, because it's unique, which is good, right? It's like you got like a unique element to the range, which provides a bit of diversity. I haven't tasted it myself yet, and I hope I will. I've got a bottle here. I'll probably do that tonight. But it's interesting. I look forward to seeing what the profile. Yeah.
And also from a value perspective, it's not the most expensive wine, so we're trying to give a value perception as well. So actually, the wines in there are more expensive than the price point alludes to. So we just that the packaging is very different. Before I get to some of the other wines, I just want to show you one. I said I'd come back to the story. It's the Clockmaker. And if you just pardon with me, so I did mention and reference the prisoners of war. So originally, the wines coming out, the old vine, and there is a project in South Africa which is becoming quite not only interesting but popular and very sexy and very cool. And if you look at Tim Atkin's latest report, there's a whole lot of what is called old vine Chenins. There are a few old vine pinotages, but for many years South Africans were pulling out the old vines. I think they regret now they pulled out so many, because that's where the jewel's coming from in terms of really, really, really serious wines from South Africa, the old vines. So we have, as I said, a few on the estate, and particularly one block. You have to be over 35 years to qualify for the project called Old Vine. And about 3 years ago, just towards the end of, 2.5-3 years ago, towards the end of COVID, David did some homework. He made the connection between the prisoners of war who were well looked after on Diemersfontein. Some of them weren't, but at Diemersfontein they were. And they actually used to live in what is currently the school. That was where their homes were. So they weren't in a prison. They were prisoners of war, but they didn't live in a prison. One of the prisoners went back to Italy, and he founded a clockmaking business in Italy. And David went over and Googled and found the son, and as a result of which made the connection, and then switched it into the Clockmaker. So that's in homage to a story on the farm being the prisoners of war, and in specific one family who created this, and it's still going today in Italy. So we actually sell a bit of our wines in Italy, which is unique. There's not many South African wines sold in Italy. So it's our most serious white wine, and it's our most expensive wine. We don't have a lot of volume, but if in the USA you want to do some hand selling and wanted a really good reference point on old vine Chenin, in Wellington, actually, we have quite a few because of what I said, the same in the Swartland, some of the best known names. So Swartland and through to Wellington is quite predominantly a bush vine. A lot of it is Chenin and old vines. And so some of the best known are coming from there. We just won double gold at Michelangelo, which is a South African award. I don't think Tim Atkin didn't give us the best rating. I think 92 points for it. It's only the second. This is the second vintage of it in terms of Clockmaker. So a very interesting wine. And for those looking to experience a little bit more of the newer development within South African wine industry, old vine Chenin is one of them. Okay. All right. And we do have room to sell. Okay. All right.
Okay. Yeah, great. I just, I think what I love about this is that, I'm a big believer that, yes, you need to pair good wine with good food, but also have a good story behind it. And I love the story that you've got behind this. Chenin coming out of South Africa, I mean, I've been away from South Africa for going on 17 years. When I was living in the Cape back then, Chenin wasn't that big. And it's amazing how just the Chenin wave has come through, and the differences. I was at a wine tasting last night, and there was some South African Chenin there. And it was like the variation just in the Chenin flavor profile from the different regions of the Western Cape is amazing. And
absolutely,
it's just, and the old wine story, again, it's something really unique there. So I look forward to tasting it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely. And definitely for your club you've developed, Warren, I think, as a point of reference, obviously Pinotage being almost uniquely South African up to a point, but and Chenin, while it's not unique, but as you said, rightly so, in the last 10 plus years, and it's been fairly recent, people have realized that they have a jewel in the vine. So I think if people could have replanted them back, that they pulled them out, they would have done that. But no, it's a really unique and serious development. I think garnering a lot of attention, both in awards and in references, and some of the price points are going through the roof. So let me, in interest of time, we do have under a number of other wines. I just wanted to quickly talk about a couple wines that we have. I'm just trying to get the sequence right. Sorry, I'm jumping around here for a second because I had 2 or 3. I'm just trying to make sure I've got my sequence of wines opened up here. So just before, I'm not going to spend a lot of time at the same level of Prodigy. We do have a Chenin, we do have a Rosé, we do have a Sauvignon Blanc. Rosé more from Wellington, Chenin more from Wellington, but our Sauvignon Blanc comes from Robinson because of what I said earlier on. That's the packaging format of our wine. Sauvignon Blanc 100%, Chenin 100%. This wine is more Grenache, Mauvais, and Cinsault, although we're moving more just to the 2, being Grenache and Mauvais. And then fairly new development to the range. I'm not going to go into too much detail of it. At a price point and more retail driven is a range we've introduced called Ovation by Diemersfontein. And that range has a similar look and feel across right now 4 wines. And if we get volume, someone says to us for another varietal, we'll do it. But this is our kind of more international, local retail push under a more lifestyle range, if that's the right way to put it. So the name Ovation is easier to pronounce for many countries. We still retain, obviously, Diemersfontein on there. We reference the South African visuals, being the fynbos on the label. We're busy upgrading this label slightly. It is Western Cape. Not all the wines come off the estate. We might put about 5% onto it, but a lot of it is done with partners in various areas, so we can do volume. And at the moment, we do have a Sauvignon Blanc. We do have a Rosé. We have a Shiraz cab, and then we've got a Merlot, but we can extend this range. So that's a little bit about Ovation. I mean,
and just on that, just for the folks listening, on my other screen, I've got the price points and the profiles. This is your most accessible price point coming from the farm, right? With so it's more your what I would call a Tuesday night wine, where you're sitting at home and you're having your casual glass of wine rather than sitting at a dinner party necessarily.
As we would call it, more the quaffing wine. We can have it, as is. So it's a little bit more. We are busy tweaking it to be a bit more fruit forward, because when we start going into things less serious, without it being a fruit juice, still give it a little bit of seriousness. But this is the most accessible price point. And from a volume perspective, we're not limited because of the region we're buying from. When you look at the alcohols, when you look at the sugars, it still retains all the classicals. So we don't play in the very sweet area of the world. I mean, predominantly in South Africa, a lot of volume of wine is in sweet. We have recently launched, Warren, news headline flash, I think, called the Sweet Note, which is when we have 4 pinotages, and that's a serious 13.5% pinotage. We just thought, many people around the world are looking to drink a sweeter style, not sweet for the sake of it, but properly done with cork mouth, with everything like that. So, that's another addition, not necessarily for the States, although I was with some Ghanaians and Nigerians yesterday, and they loved the wine, because on the African continent, we do have a sweeter palate than some. But I've seen around the world, it's not exclusive to Africa. But on Ovation, there is a slight connection to celebration, which you'll see if you take a literal translation, both of Thokozani, the name, being celebration, the musical side, where I've talked a bit about, and then the word ovation. So, if you think about it, it's a lot more in that league. So, I'm going to. Now, you caught me slightly off guard with the comment on Thokozani. So,
that's all right. We don't have to dive. I think we've given a really nice profile of the wines.
Yeah.
I don't want to put you on the spot and try and dig out a wine you don't have prep for us to talk through. But Chris, I mean, I think we could probably wrap a little bit here. I mean, I think you've given us so much depth of knowledge coming out of the region and the estate and the wine. So thank you so much for that. I know that the folks that will be watching this will all of a sudden walk away with much more education about the regions and your wonderful wines. I'll just end off by saying that, if there's anything unique that we haven't covered around the wines, something that you wouldn't be able to find on the internet. I know you've given us last little factoids already. But is there any last thoughts before we close it out and say farewell?
Yeah, no, I think, and obviously do look at our website, which is diemersfontein.co.za. We've also established in partnership Go Wellington, which is, to attract more people to Wellington. That's also under the name Go Wellington, and that's a partnership that covers not just wine. So that's already to bring more tourism. I think in terms of Diemersfontein wines, I've pretty much covered all what you'll find anywhere. Some people say, "Are you the original coffee chocolate? And how do you make it?" That sometimes gets people by, how do you get this mocha thing? But I've talked about that. I think, you asked the question of me in terms of personality, and I don't want to be flippant and say, I've met very few people in the world like David Sonnenburg. He's the most humble person. He's got incredible network connections across the States where he has family staying, across Europe. He's a very humble, gentle soul. When you meet him, he's hugely intellectual. As a psychologist by training, widely read, widely involved in the arts, and very educated in the arts. In that sense. So that is a theme all the way through, and very knowledgeable in terms of global developments. And I think the interesting thing that people don't really always know, you won't find, is his meeting with Nelson Mandela. And I'm not going to make the two one and the same, but I do reflect on David being a bit of a statesman. And going forward, I think that's what we're going to be using David for. He loves to go and do tastings. If we set up a tasting in the States tomorrow to do 3 cities and 2 weeks, David will be there. And he's given so much away of his life, both financial and time. That's what he is. And so, kind of, I say to myself, having traveled the world at a personal level, he has that statesman aura about him. And he can get on with anybody. He's the type of person that when you meet him, whether you're royalty or coming off the streets, he will treat you the same. And I think that's the personality of Diemersfontein. We don't try to make Diemersfontein only for one set of society or status level. But clearly we don't have thousands of pounds worth of wine in terms of price point. But that's what you'll get out of Diemersfontein. What you see is what you get. And I come back to 4 words that I used up front that you won't necessarily find on our website or our Instagram or Facebook, and that's that welcoming family country charm. And it really is the DNA behind Diemersfontein. You can walk into David's house tomorrow and say hello to him, and he'll meet you and all of that. And you'll find some buck running around our estate. You'll find tortoises. You'll find a few other. You don't find the big 5 or anything like that. But that's I think a wrap from my side. That hopes to cover a little bit of
that's amazing. And we'll definitely move and have a vision towards hosting David and yourself over here in the near future. That's the plan, and hopefully we can make that happen, not just in future, and vice versa. I mean, as I mentioned, we have a lot of people that are passionate about that region, and some people that have never been and who are very curious about it. So one of our visions on our side is to start really promoting the region and come and visit you. But with that, Chris, thank you so much. Have a wonderful day further, and we will speak soon.
Take care, Warren. Thanks very much. Be good, everybody. Take care. Bye.